For some reason, the desert scene before Lucy Bostil awoke varying emotions. A sweet gratitude for the fullness of her life there at the ford, yet a haunting remorse that she could not be wholly content, a vague loneliness of the soul, a thrill and a fear for the strangely calling future, glorious, unknown. She longed for something to happen. It might be terrible so long as it was wonderful. This day, when Lucy had stolen away on a forbidden horse, she was 18 years old. The thought of her mother, who had died long ago on their way into this wilderness, was the one drop of sadness in her joy. Lucy loved everybody at Bostil's Ford, and everybody loved her. She loved all of the horses, except her father's favorite racer, that perverse devil of a horse, the great Sage King. Lucy was glowing and rapt with love for all she beheld from her lofty perch, the green and pink blossoming hamlet beneath her, set between the beauty of the grey sage expanse and the ghastliness of the barren heights, the swift Colorado sullenly thundering below in the abyss, the Indians in their bright colors riding up the river trail, the eagle poised like a feather in the air, and beneath him the grazing cattle making black dots on the sage, the deep velvet azure of the sky, the golden lights on the bare peaks and the lilac vales in the far ravines, the silky rustle of a canyon swallow as he shot downward in the sweep of the wind, the fragrance of cedar, the flowers of the spear-pointed mescal, the brooding silence, the beckoning range, the purple distance. Whatever it was Lucy longed for, whatever was whispered by the wind and written in the mystery of the waste of sage and stone, she wanted it to happen there at Bostil's Ford. She had no desire for civilization. She flouted the idea of marrying the rich rancher of Durango. Bostil's sister, that stern but lovable woman who had brought her up and taught her, would never persuade her to marry against her will. Lucy imagined herself like a wild horse, free, proud, untamed, meant for the desert, and here she would live her life. The desert and her life seemed as one. Yet in what did they resemble each other? And what of this scene could she read the nature of her future? Shudderingly she rejected the red, sullen, thundering river, with its swift, changeful, endless, contending strife, for that was tragic. And she rejected the frowning mass of red rock, upreared, riven and split in canyon so grim and aloof, for that was barren. But she accepted the vast sloping valley of the Sage, rolling grey and soft and beautiful, down to the dim mountains and purple ramparts of the horizon. Lucy did not know what she yearned for, but she did not know why the desert called to her. She did not know in what it resembled her spirit, but she did know that these three feelings were as one deep in her heart. For 10 years, every day of her life, she had watched this desert scene, and never had there been an hour that it was not different, yet the same. 10 years. And she grew up watching, feeling, till from the desert's thousand moods she assimilated its nature, loved her bonds, and could never have been happy away from the open, the color, the freedom, the wildness. On this birthday, when those who loved her said she had become her own mistress, she acknowledged the claim of the desert forever, and she experienced a deep, rich, strange happiness. Hers always then the mutable and immutable desert, the leagues and leagues of slope and sage and rolling ridge, the great canyons and the giant cliffs, the dark river with its mystic thunder of waves, the pine-fringed plateaus, the endless stretch of the horizon, with its lofty, isolated, notable monuments, and the bold ramparts with their beckoning beyond. Hers always the desert seasons, the shrill icy blast, the intense cold, the steely skies, the fading snows, the grey old sage and the bleached grass under the pall of the spring sandstorms, the hot furnace breath of summer, with its magnificent cloud pageants in the sky, or the black tempests hanging there and there over the peaks, dark veils floating down and rainbows everywhere, and the lacy waterfalls upon the glistening cliffs, and the thunder of the red floods, and the glorious golden autumn, where it was always afternoon and time stood still. Hers always the rides in the open, with the sun at her back and the wind in her face. And hers, surely, sooner or later, the nameless adventure which had its inception in the strange yearning of her heart, and presaged its fulfillment somewhere down that trailless sage slope she loved so well. Bostil's house was a crude but picturesque structure of red stone and white clay and bleached cottonwoods, and it stood at the outskirts of the cluster of green enclosed cabins which composed the hamlet. Bostil was wont to say that in all the world there could hardly be a grander view than the outlook down the grey sea of rolling sage, down to the black-fringed plateaus and the wild, blue-rimmed and gold-spired horizon. One early morning in early spring, as was Bostil's custom, he ordered the racers to be brought from the corrals and turned loose on the slope. He loved to sit there and watch his horses graze, but ever he saw that riders were close at hand, and that the horses did not get out on the slope of sage. He sat back and gloried in the sight. He owned bands of mustangs. Nearby was a field of them, fine and mettlesome and racy. Yet Bostil had eyes only for the blooded favourites. Strange it was that not one of these was a mustang or a broken wild horse, for many of the riders' best mounts had been captured by them or the Indians. And it was Bostil's supreme ambition to own a great wild stallion. There was Plume, a superb mare that got her name from the way her mane swept in the wind when she was on the run. And there was Two-Face like a coquette, sleek and glossy and running, and the huge rangy bay, Dusty Ben, and the black stallion Sarchedon, and lastly Sage King, the colour of the upland sage, a racer in build, a horse splendid and proud and beautiful. "Where's Lucy?" presently asked Bostil. As he divided his love, so he divided his anxiety. Some rider had seen Lucy riding off with her golden hair flying in the wind. This was an old story. "She's up on Buckles?" Bostil queried, turning sharply to the speaker. "Reckon so," was the calm reply. Bostil swore. He did not have a rider who could equal him in profanity. "Farland, you'd orders. Lucy's not to ride them hosses, least of all Buckles. He ain't even safe for a man." "Well, he's safe for Lucy. But didn't I say no?" "Boss, it's likely you did, for you talk a lot," replied Farland. "Lucy pulled my hat down over my eyes, told me to go to thunder, and then zip, she and Buckles were dusting for the sage." "She's got to keep out of the sage," growled Bostil. "It ain't safe for her out there. Where's my glass? I want to take a look at the slope. Where's my glass?" The glass could not be found. "What's a-making them dust clouds on the sage? Antelope? Ollie used to have eyes better'n me. Use 'em, will you?" A grey-haired, hawk-eyed rider, lean and worn, approached with clinking spurs. "Down in there," said Bostil, pointing. "It's a bunch of hosses," replied Holly. "Wild hosses?" "I take 'em so, seeing how they throw that dust." "Huh, I don't like it. Lucy oughtn't to be riding around alone." "Well, boss, who could catch her up on Buckles? Lucy can ride, and there's the King and Sarch right under your nose. The only hosses on the sage that could outrun Buckles." Farland knew how to mollify his master, and a long habit had made him proficient. Bostil's eyes flashed. He was proud over Lucy's power over a horse. The story Bostil first told any stranger happening by the ford was how Lucy had been born during a wild ride, almost as if it were on the back of a horse. That, at least, was her fame, and the riders swore she was a worthy daughter of such a mother. Then, as Farland well knew, a quick road to Bostil's good will was to praise one of his favourites. "Reckon you spoke sense for once, Farland," replied Bostil with relief. "I wasn't thinking so much of danger for Lucy, but she lets that half-witted creature go with her." "No, boss, you're wrong," put in Holly earnestly. "I know the girl. She has no use for Joel, but he just runs after her." "And he's harmless," added Farland. "We ain't agreed," rejoined Bostil quickly. "What do you say, Holly?" The old rider looked thoughtful and did not speak for long. "Well, yes and no," he answered finally. "I reckon Lucy could make a man out of Joel, but she doesn't care for him, and that settles that. Maybe Joel's leaning toward the bad." "If she meets him again, I'll rope her in the house," declared Bostil. Another clear-eyed rider drew Bostil's attention from the grey waste of rolling sage. Bostil, look at the king! He's watching for something, and so search!" The two horses named were facing a ridge some few hundred yards distant. Their heads were aloft and ears straight forward. Sage King whistled shrilly, and Sarchedon began to prance. "Boys, you'd better drive 'em in," said Bostil. "They'd like nothing so well as getting out the sage. Hello, what's that shooting up behind the ridge?" "No more than Buckles with Lucy making 'em run some," replied Holly with a dry laugh. "If it ain't, Lord, look at 'em come!" Bostil's anger and anxiety might never have been. The light of the upland rider's joy shone in his keen gaze. The slope before him was open, and almost level down to the ridge that had hidden the missing girl and horse. Buckles was running for the love of running, as the girl low down over his neck was riding for the love of riding. The Sage King whistled again and shot off with a graceful sweep to meet them. Sarchedon plunged after him. Two-Face and Plume jealously trooped down too, but Dusty Ben, after a toss of his head, went on grazing. The grey and the black met Buckles and could not turn in time to stay with him. A girl's gay scream pealed up the slope, and Buckles went lower and faster. Sarchedon was left behind. Then the Grey King began to run as if before he had been loping. He was beautiful in action. This was play, a game, a race, plainly dominated by the spirit of the girl. Lucy's hair was a bright stream of gold in the wind. She rode bareback. It seemed that she was hunched low over Buckles with her knees high on his back, scarcely astride him at all. Yet her motion was one with the horse. Again that wild gay scream pealed out, call or laugh or challenge. Sage King, with a fleetness that made the eyes of Bostil and his riders glisten, took the lead, then sheered off to slow down while Buckles thundered past. Lucy was pulling him hard and had him plunging to a halt, when the rider Holly ran out to grasp his bridle. Buckles was snorting and his ears were laid back. He pounded the ground and scattered the pebbles. "No use, Lucy," said Bostil. "You can't beat the king at your own game, even with a running start." Lucy Bostil's eyes were blue, as keen as her father's, and now they flashed like his. She had a hand twisted in the horse's long mane, and as, lithe and supple, she slipped a knee across his broad back, she shook a little gauntleted fist at Bostil's grey racer. "Sage King, I hate you," she called, as if the horse were human, "and I'll beat you some day." Bostil swore by the gods his Sage King was the swiftest horse in all that wild upland country of wonderful horses. He swore the Great Grey could look back over his shoulder and run away from any broken horse known to riders. Bostil himself was half horse, and the half of him that was human he divided between his love of his fleet racers and his daughter Lucy. He had seen years of hard riding on that wild Utah border, where in those days a horse meant all the world to a man. A lucky strike of grassy upland and good water south of the Rio Colorado made him rich in all that he cared to own. The Indians, yet unspoiled by white men, were friendly. Bostil built a boat at the Indian crossing of the Colorado, and the place became known as Bostil's Ford. From time to time his personality and his reputation and his need brought horse hunters, riders, sheep-herders, and men of pioneer spirit, as well as wandering desert travelers to the ford, and the lonely isolated hamlet slowly grew. North of the river it was more than 200 miles to the nearest little settlement, with only a few lonely ranches on the road. To the west were several villages equally distant, but cut off for 2 months at a time by the raging Colorado, flooded by melting snow up in the mountains. Eastward from the ford stretched a ghastly, broken, unknown desert of canyons. Southward rolled the beautiful uplands, with valleys of sage and grass and plateaus of pine and cedar, until this rich rolling gray and green range broke sharply on a purple horizon of upflung rocky ramparts and walls and monuments, wild, dim, and mysterious. Bostil's cattle and horses were numberless, and many were his riders, but he could always use more. But most riders did not abide long with Bostil, first because some of them were of a wandering breed, wild horse hunters themselves, and secondly Bostil had two great faults. He seldom paid a rider in money, and he never permitted one of them to own a fleet horse. He wanted to own all of the fast horses himself. And in those days every rider, especially a wild horse hunter, loved his steed as part of himself. If there was a difference between Bostil and any rider of the Sage, it was that as he had more horses, so he had more love. Whenever Bostil could not get possession of a horse he coveted, either by purchase or trade, he invariably acquired a grievance toward the owner. This happened often, for riders were loath to part with their favorites, and he had made more than one enemy in his persistent nagging. It could not be said, however, that he sought to drive hard bargains. Bostil would pay any price asked for a horse. Across the Colorado, in a high, red-walled canyon opening upon the river, lived a poor sheep-herder and horse-trader named Creech. This man owned a number of thoroughbreds, 2 of which he would not part with for all the gold in the uplands. These racers, Blue Roan and Peg, had been captured wild on the ranges by Ute Indians and broken to racing. They were still young and getting faster every year. Bostil wanted them because he coveted them, and because he feared them. It would have been a terrible blow to him if any horse ever beat the Grey, but Creech laughed at all offers and taunted Bostil with a boast that in another summer he would see a horse out in front of the king. To complicate matters and lead rivalry into hatred, young Joel Creech, a great horseman, but worthless in the eyes of all save his father, had been heard to say that some day he would force a race between the king and Blue Roan, and the threat had been taken in various ways. It alienated Bostil beyond all hope of reconciliation. It made Lucy Bostil laugh and look sweetly mysterious. She had no enemies, and she liked everybody. It was even gossiped by the women of Bostil's Ford that she had more than liking for the idle Joe. But the husbands of these gossips said Lucy was only tender-hearted. Among the riders, when they sat around their lonely campfires or lounged at the corrals of the Ford, there was speculation in regard to this race hinted by Joel Creech. There never had been a race between the king and Blue Roan, and there never would be unless Joel were to ride off with Lucy. In that case there would be the grandest race ever run on the uplands, with the odds against Blue Roan only if he carried double. If Joel put Lucy up on Roan and he rode Peg, that would be another story. Lucy Bostil was a slip of a girl, born on a horse, as strong and supple as an Indian, and she could ride like a burr sticking in a horse's mane. With Blue Roan carrying her light weight, she might run away from anyone up on the king, which for Bostil would be a double tragedy, equally in the loss of his daughter and the beating of his beloved racer. But with Joel on Peg, such a race would end in heartbreak for all concerned, for the king would outrun Peg, and that would bring riders within gunshot. It had always been a fascinating subject, this long-looked-for race. It grew more so when Joel's infatuation for Lucy became known. There were fewer riders who believed Lucy might elope with Joel than there were who believed Joel might steal his father's horses. But all the riders who loved horses, and all the women who loved gossip, were united in at least one thing, and that was that something like a race or a romance would soon disrupt the peaceful, sleepy tenor of Bostil's Ford. In addition to Bostil's growing hatred for the Creeches, he had a great fear of Quartz, the horse-thief, a fear ever restless, ever watchful. Quartz hid back in the untrodden ways. He had secret friends among the riders of the ranges, faithful followers back in the canyon camps, gold for the digging, cattle by the thousand, and fast horses. He had always gotten what he wanted, except one thing. That was a certain horse, and the horse was Sage King. Quartz was a bad man, a product of the early gold fields of California and Idaho, an outcast from that evil wave of wanderers retreating back over the trails so madly traveled westward. He became a lord over the free ranges, but more than all else he was a rider. He knew a horse. He was as much horse as Bostil. Quartz rode into this wild free-range country, where he had been heard to say that a horse-thief was meaner than a poisoned coyote. Nevertheless, he became a horse-thief. The passion he had conceived for the Sage King was the passion of a man for an unobtainable woman. Courts swore that he would never rest, that he would not die till he owned the king, so there was reason for Bostil's great fear. I hope you enjoyed Chapter 1 of Wildfire by Zane Grey. I'm looking forward to diving into this book with you. I find that it is full of rich imagery and romance and all sorts of other things going on, and it does not go quite the way that you think it does. But I'm looking forward to discussing this book with you all once we conclude our reading of it. There are many themes within it that I very much want to discuss, so but I do hope you enjoy the book for what it is as entertainment and sort of capture some of the themes that it discusses throughout. And so we will next time read through Chapter 2, and I do hope you enjoy. Pax vobiscum. Goodbye.